Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
Will it be third time's a charm for some former Buckeyes? Is Justin Fields actually ahead of schedule? And let's take a trip down memory lane, shall we? All this and more coming up on the Unscripted Ohio podcast.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove and in part by JFQ Lending. All your home purchase and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye. You'll never pay for your appraisal with these guys. Licensed in 33 states and more on the way. Check them out at jfqlending.com. For the latest news, notes, analysis, and discussion, check us out on buckeyegrove.com and follow us on Twitter at UnscriptedOhio1. Now, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Ma! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Ma! The meatloaf!
Good Monday. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast. Either I'm having an out-of-body experience or I am your host, Kyle Lamb. We are here thanks to BuckeyeGrove.com as well as our title sponsor, JFQ Lending. All of your mortgage and refinance needs should be handled by a Buckeye, so check them out at jfqlending.com. And of course, we are also here thanks to support from GoBus. Ride to over 40 stops across Ohio, connecting rural communities to Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati. Get to Ohio games this fall with GoBus and bring comfort back to traveling. Check them out at ridegobus.com. It was weekend, and I know it's weird to be saying this. It's the month of August, and I was actually pleasantly content with watching basketball. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but yeah, we have a basketball tournament going on. Those of you that haven't been following, I think most of you probably have been made aware, especially if you follow on anybody on Twitter, really. You saw that they were talking about the Carmen's Crew team in the basketball tournament. I know that's a strange phrase and sentence that I just said. Carmen's Crew being the team of Ohio State alums that have gotten together to play in the very Orwellian named the basketball tournament. Of course, the Carmen's Crew used to be called, the last 2 years, they were called the Scarlet and Gray team. They are now Carmen's Crew because the Ohio State University, in their infinite wisdom, decided that it was of their best interest to enforce their trademarks, and they actually did not want Carmen's Crew being called Scarlet and Gray anymore, so they are now Carmen's Crew. But anyway, long story short, it is, of course, the basketball team made up of some former Ohio State players that you would recognize: Aaron Kraft, David Lighty, William Buford, Evan Ravenel, coached by Jared Solinger, along with Evan Turner and Dallas Lauderdale, who actually played the last couple of years. Jared Solinger also played the last couple of years. He did not play this year. He's coach instead. But anyway, LaQuinton Ross is also on the team. It's been a really, really good ride. We're going to talk about that here in a minute, but the basketball tournament, of course, this big 64-team tournament made up of a bunch of former college basketball players. These are actually guys, the only rule is you're not allowed to have an NBA contract in order to play in this tournament. So most of these guys are people that are playing in overseas leagues, but it's a very, very good tournament. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. As I said in the open, we'll also talk a little bit about Justin Fields. So far, so good. There's not a lot to go on here. I know if you only go by the spring game, he didn't look very good. But, there are some people talking so far here through summer and now the first couple days of fall practice, and there are some signs that maybe Justin Fields is ahead of schedule, based on where a quarterback would be expected to be at this moment into fall camp. So that's a good sign. And also, I got Corey Thompson coming up here on the show in a few minutes of the Scarlet and Gray podcast. He and I are going to take a trip down memory lane. We have a little fun project that we did. We'll explain more later, but we're going to compare the best players across eras in the John Cooper era, the Jim Tressel era, and the Urban Meyer era. So that should be a lot of fun. I want to say this, by the way, a little bit of a shout out. So on the first day of practice on Friday, if you have not caught this yet, Kevin Noon and Mark Gibler and myself were over at practice as it launched. We got a tour of the facilities, by the way, and we talk about this on the Rapid Reaction podcast. If you have not listened to that yet, it's a short 10-minute recap of what we saw in our 25 minutes of practice, and then also our walk through the new Players Lounge over there at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. And I got to tell you, by the way, the facilities are just top notch. Check out my Twitter at KYLam8. Go to search for Friday. I posted about 9 videos, short clips ranging from 20 seconds to a minute. But it is posted through our walkthrough of the facilities, and it's just if I were an Ohio State football player, I would just hang out there all day long because there's a gaming room, there's a TV lounge, there's a full service kitchen. There are sleep pods, massage chairs, salt flotation pools. It's just crazy everything that they've got over there, but it's a lot of fun. Really, really cool. They did a great job with it. So check out the Rapid Reaction podcast, though. Kevin, Mark, and I talk about our brief, and I can't emphasize this enough, very brief analysis and observations, because we did not get to hang around practice for very long. After 25 minutes, we got kicked out of there. So we didn't get a chance to see very much, but we do talk for the 10 minutes about what we saw, and I hope you will enjoy it. So the Rapid Reaction podcast was posted on there. This is the 3rd episode. The first episode was dealing with a commitment in recruiting. The second one was to introduce Alex Gleitman to Buckeye Grove and the Unscripted Ohio Network, and then the third one being the practice version. So the Rapid Reaction podcast, by the way, will be coming up anytime there's breaking news this season, recruiting commitments, or even after a game. I think Kevin is planning on having a Rapid Reaction show be posted immediately after games. So look forward to that this coming fall here on the Unscripted Ohio Podcast Network. So I mentioned basketball. I'm going to get back to that discussion. So the Carmen's Crew on Sunday played in the semifinal of the basketball tournament. This is the 5th year running for the tournament, and Carmen's Crew had its work cut out for it. They were playing a team called the Overseas Elite, which is basically a collection of former college all-stars that have been playing overseas. I know, you probably couldn't have guessed that by the Overseas Elite name. But, Jeremy Pargo, really, really good guard, had a cup of coffee in the NBA, really good. Justin Burrell had a cup of coffee. Jonathan Simmons played for the Spurs for a couple of years, really good player, really, really good defensive player. This team is very talented, and the Ohio State alums, led by Aaron Kraft at point guard, they picked up Dimitri McCamey this year. He's a former Illinois player that actually was high school teammates of Evan Turner, which is the connection as to why he's on this team. But I mentioned Buford and Leidy, and of course John Diebler as well. But this Ohio State team had its work cut out for it, and lo and behold, they came out and beat Overseas Elite, which, by the way, has won all 4 tournaments they've participated in. They were the 4-time defending champions and had not lost a game. They were 29-0 coming into this game. So, shout out to this Carmen's Crew team. They got it done. They pulled off the upset. They led for 9-minute quarter. There's 9-minute quarters in this event, so you're talking about 36 minutes of game action. They led for probably 35 out of the 36 minutes. They did a fantastic job. They will now play in the championship game Tuesday night at 9 p.m. That game will be broadcast on ESPN. They are playing the Golden Eagles team, which is a collection of former Marquette players. The winner of this tournament will get a $2 million prize split among the coaches and the players. So $2 million on the line for this former Ohio State team. They have been a lot of fun to watch, and the ironic thing about this is coming into this tournament, I actually had very low expectations for them for a couple of reasons. Jared Sullinger played the last couple of years. Dallas Lauderdale played the last couple of years. Both of them were unavailable. They picked up LaQuinton Ross, and he's been a good addition for them. But they also were supposed to pick up Deshaun Thomas and Lenzel Smith. Thomas backed out because he got married, and so the wedding plans wound up messing with the basketball schedule, so he did not play. Lenzel Smith actually hurt his hand. He's needing surgery for that hand, so he has also been unavailable for this entire tournament. So with Solinger not playing and a couple of these guys that they picked up not being able to go as well, I actually didn't have a lot of, I didn't have high expectations for this particular brand of the Carmen's Crew in this tournament, being the third year. But as it turns out, they get to the quarterfinals in Chicago, and, they look really good for most of the game on Friday night. They almost let that one get away at the end, but they still pulled it out. And then Sunday, they, like I said, 29-0, 4-time defending champion, and overseas elite, and the Carmen's Crew got it done, and so they will be playing Tuesday night for the championship for $2 million. If you watch this game, by the way, I'm not going to go into detail because I've spent a couple podcasts in the past talking about the Elam ending. The Elam ending, of course, being the first dead ball at the under 4-minute timeout. The first dead ball occurring under 4 minutes in the fourth quarter. Basically, the clock shuts off. The game clock. That is not, the shot clock remains going for every possession, but the game clock stops, and then you add 8 points to the leading team's total, and that is the score that ends the game. So the first team that gets to that score, the game ends. If you saw this game on Sunday, if you were not a fan of the Elam ending, I think this probably gave you a little bit better perspective about how the Elam ending could change college basketball, because that was a really intense game. Summer basketball, yes, it's not real organized. It's just a tournament. It's not an actual league. I get that. But I got to say, for being a summer basketball game, it's about the most intense finish you could possibly have. And I'll tell you why. It's because with the clock off, both teams were just fighting to get to a score, okay? It didn't matter. You weren't in a race against time, so you don't have intentional fouls. You don't have to race threes up as soon as you get, the basketball down at the other end. It's just a matter of running the best offense you can and playing the best defense you can without fouling, okay? Because you don't want to send teams to the free throw line any longer in this strategy, because you don't want to give up points. You only have 8 to spare once you start the Elam ending, so you can't give up free throws. You're trying not to foul, as opposed to the current system where if you're behind 5 points with 30 seconds left, you're trying to foul and get as many possessions as you can. In the Elam ending, you're not trying to get extra possessions. You're trying to maximize your possessions. I mean, if you're down 5 and you need to get another 8 points beyond that, then you need 13 points. You need to outscore 13-5 or 13-4 or something. Then, yeah, you're trying to extend the game and get as many possessions, but you're just trying to get stops and maximize your own possessions. So the Elam ending, I think, would be great for college basketball. Watch it on Tuesday night, okay? Watch the Carmen's Crew go for the title on Tuesday night, and I think you're going to like what you see if this is your first exposure to the Elam ending. I'm not saying it's not for everybody. I understand there's a big adjustment period here, but again, if Sunday was any indication of what games could be like with this finish, then I'd say let's try it out. Let's try it out in preseason games, at least in college basketball. Maybe try it out in the NIT one year. Let's just get a feel for it, and maybe people will come around on it. So anyway, Carmen's Crew playing Tuesday night for the championship, $2 million at stake against the Golden Eagles. That is the championship game of the basketball tournament. Big upset. 4-time defending champs go down at the hands of a bunch of Ohio State alums and a couple other Ohio guys tagging along for the ride. Real quick, before I get to Corey, so interesting comments made on Sunday by Justin Fields, and this is actually, I heard this from two other people actually, so I think there's something to this, but Justin was saying conversations with Brandon Bowen reveal that Brandon felt that so far where they're at in the first couple of days of practice and this point in the fall, he thinks that the offense under Justin Fields is actually ahead of where they have been in the past couple of seasons, where they traditionally are at this point in practice. Brandon Bowen at least feels that Justin Fields has the offense a little bit further ahead than normal. So I think that's encouraging. I know people's only public observations stem from the spring game with Justin Fields, and it was not a very good showing. But I think the combination of, it's been said by a couple players now, Fields actually had the entire playbook down within a couple weeks arriving at Ohio State. Remember, I mentioned this in the past, he's actually an honors student from high school. So we're talking about a smart kid here that is a very good student and picks up a lot of things. I think he's, very savvy. I think he's very smart. He knows the game. He understands it. I think the reads and all the mental aspect of the game, I don't think that's going to be an issue. It's just a matter of, he's got to put that into action. He's got to establish a relationship and timing with his wide receivers, and just get used to throwing those routes. It's a little bit different system. So I think if he gets all that put together, look, I think the sky is the limit for Fields. I'm not going to say he's ever going to be as good of a passer as Haskins, but when you add in the running game and you add in some of the other things that he can do, I think it's going to be a more diverse offense, a more wide open offense. I think this can be a really, really good offense for Ohio State. I'm not convinced it's going to happen right out of the gate, and I'm not trying to put a lot of pressure, but it will be interesting to see, as at least Brandon Bowen tends to think that the offense is ahead of schedule right now. You want to be ahead of schedule when the season starts here at the end of the month. So it doesn't mean a lot right now, but it's good to hear at least somebody that's had some experience being around this time in the program. It's good to hear them say that out loud, because I think that's encouraging. I think that they're happy with where it's going. I know if you ask the coaches publicly, they're going to give a lot of qualifiers. Well, let's put it this way. Players are never where the coaches want them to be. Coaches always want more, and who could blame them? There's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of job opportunities on the line. Coaches are always pushing for players to do more and do better. But I do think, though, it's good to hear from at least a couple sources, a couple people, that Justin Fields is at least turning heads for right now in fall camp. Okay, it's time this is a little fun exercise that Corey and I have been wanting to do. It was originally going to be a throwback Thursday type deal, and this isn't Thursday, so deal with it. Just use your imagination, pretend it's Thursday. So let me set this up a little bit here. So I got to give a hat tip first, because we saw this, to be fair. Corey saw this as an exercise done comparing Tressel and Myers rosters and theoretically who would win. This was done by 11 Warriors. We decided to take it a step further. We're including Cooper's roster, and so we're going to go down through now and go position by position with all three coaches and pick out the guys that we would like to see start in a theoretical matchup, a three-way series between these coaches' teams, the all-time rosters. So we have each picked our own guys, and we're going to compare notes and talk about it, and we're going to do a little throwback, a little look back at the last 20 years of Ohio State football. I guess it'd be actually go back 30 years for Ohio State football. So, Corey, I don't know about you, but this was a lot tougher than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was going to be like, okay, easy, give me an hour, I'll go down through, I'll make my list, and I'll be done. And it turns out this was a several hour project for me.
Yeah, so for me as well, I thought it was funny. The allowed time we were going to record, you called me up. Oh, I'm not quite done yet.
Yes, this is true.
It's all good, man. I understand there's some amazing talent that has come through Ohio State, through all three coaches. I do want to give credit to a tweeter. I don't know what we'd call it, but his name is Evan. He was the one that gave the idea for adding Cooper to it. I thought, well, that'd be a good discussion. Let me take this to Kyle. And so on top of 11 Warriors, I give it to Evan as well. And I honestly, gosh, I was excited to do this because it's, Kyle, you and I are a little older in our years, not too old, but we're a little older. We go back at least in the 90s, and it's fun to even relive a little bit of the immense talent Cooper had, because a lot of the kids today remember Urban, obviously, and a little bit of Tressel, but Cooper had some just NFL rosters out there.
Yeah, it is amazing doing this exercise, going back through every roster year. I literally went back starting 1988 when Cooper, came to Ohio State from Arizona State. I literally looked over the rosters every single year since then. So it was jogging my memory on some guys I had forgotten about, but it brought back a lot of memories of other guys I remember watching. And seeing this list under Cooper, it really is impressive. We'll get into the nuts and bolts. But, Corey, so on Friday, I was over at the first day of practice, right? And, we got the media got this tour of, the players' facilities there at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. And they have added a lot of really cool features, that, players' lounge and additional, player training facilities, like sleep pods and saltwater, pools and massage chairs and the game room and all the. I mean, we could go down and talk about that forever. But what's really interesting is in the back. If you go in the back room to come back around to the main part of the plaza where the coaches' rooms are, and then where the indoor facility is, they have this hallway that is basically it's just a memorabilia hallway that it just recognizes some of the best players and all the coaches that have coached at Ohio State. You know what was missing? A bullet board. The greatest bullets ever to play football at Ohio State, the Ohio State University. And I just thought that that was missing, and I'm sure with enough effort and our friend Johnny Bullet talking about it, maybe we can wish this into existence eventually.
Number one bullet's got to be Justin Fields.
He is the number one bullet. Number one with a bullet. So
exactly. How do you like that band Nonpoint says, he's a bullet with a name on it. So.
Yes, indeed he is. But that was really cool, though. By the way, if I haven't mentioned that, I know a lot of you probably saw my Twitter. I showed a lot of videos of the tour, and it was really incredible to see the job that they have done with that place. So thought that was really interesting, but we're going to get into it now.
Did they add a slide? Did you see a slide anywhere?
I did not see a slide, but what's interesting is the second level of the lounge where the full service kitchen is and where the TV viewing area is, you could actually it would be perfect to have a slide up there because you could go slide right down into the indoor facility, the indoor practice field. So they actually should think about doing that. That would be a really interesting addition.
Yeah, why not? And a fireman pole.
Yeah, I gotta have a fireman pole. Okay, let's get into the nuts and bolts. So let's start off with the obvious position, everybody's favorite position to talk about, quarterback. So, Corey, let's start with the starters at quarterback. So, what did you have for the three teams here?
Well, we'll start with Cooper, and I will say that the guy was previously my favorite quarterback of all time, Ohio State, but I've rewatched some clips of him, and I think maybe I'm putting some people higher, but it's the two best quarterbacks for Cooper. We're going too deep on that. Joe Germain and Bobby Hoying. I don't think, to me, there's no argument there, but you may have a different one. I don't know. So
yeah, that one was really easy. I put in not even 2 seconds of thought on that. I had Germain 1 and I had Hoying 2. I think
exactly.
I think Germain still remains okay. I'm gonna hold back. I'm gonna stop myself from saying this. I was gonna say I thought Joe Germain still remains the best quarterback in Ohio State history. Dwayne Haskins obviously had an excellent year.
You sacrilege!
I thought about it. People just have to remember. I mean that 1998 version of Joe Germain. I mean he was absolutely phenomenal. Not that Dwayne Haskins wasn't phenomenal this year, but I think you could make a case between those two.
Well, people back then weren't putting up 50 TDs on the regular, so it's a little different in 1998 versus 2018. The offenses are a little bit more advanced than 20 years down the road, but for what it was back then, Germain was. I mean, talk about Ohio State at that point. You think the history of quarterbacks right now at Ohio State isn't great. Back then, it was barren. There was just not much there, and Joe Germain was just a breath of fresh air. That guy was just legitimately one of the best in the country.
Yeah, he really was. And for people that don't know or don't remember his story, I mean, he was a little-known JUCO kid. Came in kind of scrawny, wasn't real strong, but he got better at Ohio State. His arm strength improved his last year there, and he was very, very accurate. Just that, cool as a cucumber, didn't make a lot of mistakes, very accurate. did a great job with the pre-snap reads. He was a great quarterback to watch, and there's a very good case to be made for Dwayne Haskins, though I'm not saying he is better than Haskins. He certainly doesn't have the arm strength. It is hard to compare because, like Corey said, two very different eras. I mean, you didn't have guys throwing for 5,000 yards and 50 touchdowns back then unless you played for Houston and your name was Klingler. But those guys,
the run and gun,
those run and gun Houston teams, they would throw for 800 yards and their opponents would throw for 700 yards against them. It was just crazy football. But yeah, so we both got Jermaine and Hoying there at quarterback. So for Meyer, I have got this is gonna turn some heads. I've got Dwayne Haskins, of course, and JT Barrett. Now I thought long and hard about Braxton Miller, but I went with JT Barrett because of being the 4-year starter and doing everything that he accomplished. Corey, I'm curious which route you went there for Meyer.
I went Haskins number 1, of course. I think he's the best quarterback in Ohio State history, in my opinion. I fought over it because I think JT is a lot better than people think, and I'm the biggest JT defender you'll ever meet, but I went with Miller because I think even though I don't totally agree that Miller just won games by himself, there was some serious talent there. Carlos Hyde, Philly Brown, etc. That offensive line was pretty sick. But Miller was the guy. And he was just the guy. If he was making plays, we were doing well. If he wasn't, then our team wasn't really thriving. JT to me was more of a distributor, though a phenomenal distributor, but more of a distributor, and Miller was a playmaker, so I went with Miller.
And for Jim Tressel, who did you have as your 2 quarterbacks there?
Gee, this was pretty easy, actually.
Yes, it was. It really was.
Kind of have to go with the Heisman winner, Troy Smith, and on top of that, I went Terrell Pryor second.
Yeah, nothing needs to be added here. Those were the obvious 2 choices, especially since we both decided.
Todd Beckman wasn't on your list?
And Joe Bauserman was also not on the list.
That's fickle. That was fickle.
It made it a lot easier knowing that we both put Braxton Miller on the Urban Meyer team, and so because we put Braxton Miller with Urban Meyer, it was like Corey said, a no-brainer as to who would be remaining for Jim Tressel. By the way, I should clarify. So there were some of these guys, obviously, that were recruited by one coach and played for one coach and then played for a second coach, or just got recruited by one coach and then played for a second coach. So generally speaking, Corey and I both agreed that we would put guys with the coach that they really got the gist of their career or got started with. So like some guys, if the first coach they were already starting with and then carried over to the next coach, we put them with the first coach. But if they didn't start for the first coach and then started becoming a name for themselves with the second one, that's the coach that we put them with. So you're going to see not a hard and fast rule on this, but generally that's the criteria that we tried to go by. So let's move to running back now. So this one, there's been a lot of good running backs. Let's start with Urban Meyer. So this was a tough one for the second one. The first, obviously, Ezekiel Elliott. There's no debating that one. He was clear cut number 1. I had a hard time for number 2 deciding between Carlos Hyde and Curtis Samuel. Now, I still think to this day, Curtis Samuel had a lot of talent, and I feel like he was underutilized. So for that reason, I went with Carlos Hyde because of the production, and he really carried, that 2013 team especially. They should have won the Big Ten title that year. I think if they had used him consistently all game, especially in the critical spots, I think they would have beat Michigan State. But I went with Carlos Hyde, Corey, as my second running back there.
Yeah, I went Zeke and Hyde as well. I didn't consider Curtis Samuel because I thought of him more as an H-back receiver type, and my second guy was J.K. Dobbins. If I was not going to go with Carlos Hyde, but Hyde has been more successful than Dobbins to date, and Hyde was just. I mean, look, Zeke was Zeke. Zeke's arguably the greatest running back in Ohio State history. Carlos Hyde was a monster in his own right. So, I love Dobbins, but I don't put him on. I know he's going to surpass Hyde this year, but I don't put him on Hyde's level right now.
Jim Tressel, I had Maurice Clarett and Beanie Wells. Change my mind.
I don't have to. I had the exact same order as well. I mean, the youngins maybe not know this. Maurice Clarett, and Kyle and I were talking on the phone the other day about this. If he didn't get hurt and he wasn't stupid about his career, we may not be considering Zeke the best. We may be thinking we may be comparing Zeke to Mo C rather than to other running backs like Beanie Wells, Archie Griffin, or that, because Mo C was amazing. I mean, his first game, 175 yards and 3 touchdowns. Lydell Roth was a borderline 5-star kid that came in the year before, was a starter, and Mo C came in first spring and beat him out.
I was there for that first game, and I remember the stadium was chanting Maurice by the third quarter. It was incredible.
Hall, right?
Yeah, not exactly, but it's really incredible to have seen. I don't think I've ever seen a freshman get that kind of reception in Ohio State football history, like first game like that. I mean, he came out of the gates, and it was just an instant explosion, instant excitement. Ohio State football was just rocking around him, and I think about this to this day. It's scary to think if he had stayed healthy, if he had stayed eligible, and if he had stayed at Ohio State rather than bolting for the NFL because of all the off the field stuff. If all that had happened and he had gotten 3 years at Ohio State, I mean, sure, we'd be talking about Eddie George, we'd be talking about Ezekiel Elliott, we'd be talking about Archie Griffin, some of the great running backs at Ohio State, but I think Maurice Clarett would be right there at number one, if not clear-cut number one, if he had a chance to play 2 more years.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. And then, of course, there was no argument about Beanie Wells. I mean, Wells is an all-time Ohio State great. God bless him. I didn't think he was as good as Mo C, but he was still a phenomenal player.
I know who you're picking for number 1 running back under Cooper, but I am curious your second pick. So who did you wind up going with there?
I went with Pepe Pearson and no, I'm just kidding. Eddie George, obviously number 1, and if you don't have number 1, I don't know what to tell you. This you may disagree with me on. I went Michael Wiley number 2 because I looked at the Robert Smith. And Robert Smith was obviously the best pro of all of them except for Eddie. He might have been better than Eddie if he played longer, but I just went with their college careers. And Pepe, Raymond Harris, Michael, they all and Robert Smith, they all had similar type careers. One really stellar year, and arguably Michael Wiley, in my opinion, had the best of those because he was also an added receiver out of the backfield, much better than the other 3. So that's why I went with Michael Wiley.
I went with Eddie, and then I went with Robert Smith. I resisted the urge to put Butler Benote as my number 2 running back. We were joking about that the other day. Benote was an interesting case. He was actually a defensive back by trade, got put over, played at running back some, and he actually filled in as a part-time starter the year that Robert Smith sat out. But I still went with Robert Smith because I think he was the most talented of the bunch by far. He had really good 91 and 93 seasons. If he had played in 92 and not sat out, I think he would have put up also some incredible numbers, kind of like the Maurice Smith thing too. If he had a chance to play a whole career at Ohio State, it's scary to think what he would have done. But I went with Robert Smith at number 2 because of that talent level.
Can't really argue. Robert Smith is a great player.
Yeah, he really was. So let's move on to receivers. So we decided to put up 3 guys per wide receiver position, and let's start off with Cooper. These 3 guys, just an incredible collection of talent here. I went with 3 that I think most of you will find very agreeable: Joey Galloway, Terry Glenn, and David Boston. D. Miller I'll put in there as just an honorable mention because he was a very, very good 4-year receiver for Ohio State. But Galloway, Glenn, and Boston are my 3 there.
Yeah, it's indisputable. I mean, you got the leading receiver of all time, Ohio State, David Boston. Terry Glenn, in my opinion, had the single greatest year of any receiver in Ohio State. He was, if you were watching in '95, holy smokes. And I love Bobby Hoying and all, but he made Hoying look good at times. And Joey Galloway, of course, an all-time great. So that's an absurd collection of receivers right there.
So I've got for Jim Tressel. I mean, these are 3 really good receivers, but man, it just seems
Tressel had a lot of good ones.
Tressel was difficult. I went with Anthony Gonzalez, Santonio Holmes, and Michael Jenkins. I thought about adding in Ted Ginn in there, but he's a tough. But I would have done that just because there's kind of not a place for him in what we're doing because of his return abilities. But those are the 3 that I went with. I'm curious which ones you picked there.
Actually, when I thought we were doing just 2, I actually had Ginn off as well. I had Jenkins and Santonio Holmes. Interesting factoid, both Jenkins and Holmes had a higher yards per average than Ginn, which shocked me a little bit. Because Ginn being the burner, you'd figure he would blow everybody away. But I would Jenkins, Santonio Holmes, and Ted Ginn. I love Gonzalez, but I just to me, Ginn was just such a playmaker. I had to if I'm going to go 3, I have to put him on there.
I think to this day, Gonzalez remains the best route runner that Ohio State has ever had, and I say that not lightly, considering Michael Thomas is another guy who we'll mention here in a minute. But I
everybody knows he'll be.
Yeah, everybody knows he'll be on there. But I think Gonzalez is the best pure route runner that we have ever seen at Ohio State. So I'll give you a chance then to put your Meyer list up there. So just imagine a screen. If this were like a some kind of PowerPoint presentation, we'd be putting a picture of Michael Thomas up here right now. So use your imagination on that. We're very low budget here at Unscripted Ohio, so we're not doing that. But so obviously Michael Thomas is number 1 for Urban Meyer. So I'm curious what the other 2 guys that you had at this position.
I had Paris Campbell, number 2. Hard to beat a 90-catch, 1,000-yard season. And I slaved over this one. I wanted to go KJ Hill because I think KJ Hill is probably going to break the record this year. He's so consistent. He's so good. But I had to go with Devin Smith just because he might be the greatest deep threat of all time.
Yes, he had at one point, I think through the first half of that, was it the first half of the 2014 season, I think he was averaging like 35 yards a catch or something. It was
absurd.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. So I also went with Devin Smith. I toyed, this is going to shock people. I thought about Paris Campbell. I went with Evan Spencer as number 3 because he was, even though he didn't have the flashy catch numbers and you're not going to remember him as one of the best pass catchers ever at Ohio State, what he did down the stretch as not only, coming up with some big catches and then that big pass against Alabama as well, but his blocking, unbelievable blocking. I mean, that's the best you're ever going to see from an Ohio State receiver. And I just think all those things combined, I put him on the list because of his overall total contributions down the stretch of that 2014 season.
Yeah, you got to love Evan Spencer. Plus, just Ohio State through and through, the ultimate team player. Got to love him.
Corey, name your 3 starting tight ends for the 3 coaches.
Yeah, I only did 1 per coach. I got to be honest, because the tight ends, even historically, have just not been used that much at Ohio State.
Same here.
Cooper, to me, is obvious. Ricky Dudley, first-round draft pick at Tampa. He had 37. His best year, I think, was 37 catches, and I thought he had a better year than that. But I would go with Trell, just name them all. Tressel, I did just Jake Stoneburner because, ironically, Tressel didn't use a tight end very much.
Yep.
And Urban, I went with Jeff Howerman. He had the best tight end year of any Urban era. I mean, he just barely edged out Marcus Ball. So it's been, the well's kind of dry with tight ends.
I had the same list. The only difference is with Howerman, I was debating on putting Nick Vanette rather than Ball, but I wound up going with the same 3 as you did. So I'm going to start off now. Okay, so this is where I think we both agree that the offensive line is very, very much Cooper. Tressel and Meyer, especially, you can put some very good offensive linemen together, but the Cooper years were just incredible. So I went with, for a Cooper starting line, I went with the obvious Corey Stringer and Orlando Pace at tackles. I went with also pretty obvious LaShawn Daniels and Rob Murphy at guard. And then I went with LaCharles Bentley at center. I know you could make a case for Bentley being under Tressel, but he was already starting in a very good starter under Cooper, so I went with Bentley there. I'm curious if your offensive line differs any under Cooper.
It does a little bit. Obviously, Pace Stringer, that's okay. Come on. That's almost a Hall of Fame tandem right there. I went with Rob Murphy, and I cheated a little bit. Bentley technically started at guard for a year. I put him at guard.
Okay.
And my center was All-American Juan Porter.
Yeah.
For Cooper.
Had I not put Bentley at center, I would have put Juan Porter at center. So we had the same thinking. I went with Bentley at center because I placed him there, but Porter would have been my pick.
He's known as a center. I cheated a little bit. You were actually right. I just cheated just a bit. I didn't want to leave Bentley or Porter off. So it's like, okay. Well,
I had a tough time.
Fudge the numbers here.
I had a tough time putting together the Tressel line because it was like there was like too deep at every position, and it's hard picking just one. So I'll let you go first on Tressel, but I'm curious what you came up with here.
I actually had trouble because I didn't think Tressel's offensive lines, while they were good, they weren't. You didn't have like spectacular people jumping out at you. Other than my center, I'll say Nick Mangold. I don't know how you go anywhere else with that, but. My guards, I had a little trouble with this, but I did go Adrian Clark and Doug Daddish. I actually thought Clark was very underappreciated. Made it in the NFL for a little while too. And my tackles were Mike Adams and Kirk Barton.
Okay, we were very close on this. I also had Mengold at center. I had Adrian Clark and Bryant Browning at guard, and then I had Barton and Adams at tackle as well. So we got 4 of the same there. The only difference is you had Daddish and I had Browning.
People, we have not seen each other's list before.
Yeah, yeah. I promise you, there's a lot of agreement here. We did this completely individually. We did not cheat. We did not take notes with each other, or give it any kind of peek inside how we were going to do this. So this is completely new. We're talking about this for the first time. So the Urban Meyer list. So I went with there were 3 really good guards or centers here, Price, Elfline, and Lindsley, but I did go with Billy Price at center. I went with Taylor Decker and Jack Muhort at tackle, and then Michael Jordan and what is my other guard here? Demetrius Knox is the guys I decided at guard.
We're actually a little far off, except for tackles. We got the tackles exactly the same. I almost wanted Jamarco Jones, but Muhort, he was great as well. I forgot he was a left tackle for a year for when Taylor Decker was manning the right tackle spot. But for offensive guard, I chose Price as a guard, and because I wanted F-Line as my center because he's a first Remington Award winner there, and I was all right. Well, I'll put F-Line at center. I went with Price as guard, and I went Andrew Norwell as the other guard.
Okay, yeah, you went off script a little bit on Norwell, but I completely admire what you did cheating there. It's not cheating, but moving Price.
It's a little cheating.
Moving Price over got you an easier pick there. So I'll give you that.
I didn't want to leave F-Line off.
So let's move on to this. This one was a lot of fun for really all 3, especially for really all 3, but Cooper and Meyer especially. So defensive line. So let's start with Meyer. It's a shame because of the Bosa brothers. You have to leave off a lot of great defensive ends under Urban Meyer, like Sam Hubbard, Taekwon Lewis, etc. But you got to go with the Bosas. You got to go with the Bosas. And I for my tackles, I had 3 guys that I really wanted to pick. I wanted to pick John Simon, and I wanted to pick Adolphus Washington and Michael Bennett. I wound up going with Bennett and Washington as a pair to the Bosa brothers.
I did the Bosa brothers as well because it's the most obvious, and I love Chase Young, and I agree with you. Jalen Holmes is another really good one. I went with tackles. I went Adolphus Washington and Jermont Jones. Yeah,
that's another guy I considered, and Jonathan Hankins. He deserves some recognition there too. He was another really good one. So
he only had 1 year with Meyer though.
Yeah, that's true. So give me your starters for Tressel.
Oh, Hankins. I put him with Tressel.
Okay.
Will Smith. Got to go with Will. Rest in peace, buddy. Cam Hayward. Vernon Golston. It was really tough to leave some guys off, but that's the 4 I went with.
So you put Golston on the outside because he could have technically been both.
I put Hayward on the inside, put Golston on the outside.
Okay, yeah. Golston technically started off on the inside, but he wound up being on the outside. So I went with Golston and Smith on the outside, and I went with Cam Hayward and Quinn Pitcock as the other tackle.
Pitcock was underrated, man. He was really good.
Yeah, he was a really good one. Cooper's defensive line, this was my favorite to do. This one ran right off the tongue. Alonzo Spellman and Mike Brable on the outside. Picking Brable was tough because Matt Pincus was really good too, but I went with Spellman and Brable, and I went with Dan Wilkinson and Luke Bickle on the inside.
Gosh, Cooper really, like I said this before the show, wreaked havoc on the sack records that Ohio State, his lines did. I went with Vrabel and Jason Simmons on the outside.
Another good pick. Yeah, Spellman was one of my favorite. Sorry to interrupt you. Yeah, Spellman was one of my favorites early on when I was a kid, like just getting invested in Ohio State football. Spellman was like probably my first favorite defensive player to watch.
I hated leaving him off. It's like, geez, how do I do it? Cooper made it tough. And then I went with Wilkinson and Finkus on the inside.
Okay. Yeah, Pincus could have gone inside or outside, so that would have been an acceptable pick either way. Okay, so linebacker. Let's start with Corey. I'll let you start. Let's start with Jim Tressel's group here.
Tressel's group. I think before Joey Bosa, my all-time favorite Buckeye on defense, AJ Hawk. And if you guys are too young to have watched him, man, you missed out. Dude he was amazing. James Laurinaitis in the middle, and Bobby Carpenter on the other side.
3-time All-American James Laurinaitis, and I also had Hawk and Carpenter, so we had the same linebackers there. So I had for Cooper, so I had the obvious Andy Katzenmoyer on the inside. Matt Wilhelm was another guy that really deserves it, but there wasn't room for him. And I also did Lorenzo Styles and Greg Belisari on the outside.
Man, we actually went different. That's just kind of interesting. And they're good picks, though. Belisari was a great pick. I was struggling with that one, but I went Andy Katzenmoyer. That's the obvious one. Niall Diggs. I really loved Niall Diggs when he played. And Steve Tovar.
Yeah, Tovar's another guy that played inside and outside. I struggled whether to put him on there. He was another guy very much in the running for one of those spots. What'd you have for Urban?
This was harder than I thought it would be for Urban, but I went Ryan Shazier. I gave him to Urban. Well, he technically didn't play for Tressel anyway, but
yeah.
Raekwon McMillan in the middle.
Yep.
And Darren Lee on the other side.
Same three here. Yeah, same three on that one. So I will start with Urban's defensive backs. So I wound up going with Marshawn Lattimore and Denzel Ward at corner, and Malik Hooker and Von Bell at safety.
Exact same four.
Okay.
And then we were talking about add another one. I guess if I had to add another one, I'd go with Garen Conley. I really, really liked Conley's game.
Yep, very much so. So let's jump over to Tressel, defensive backs. I'll let you start. What do you have for Tressel?
This was tough. Malcolm Jenkins, Dante Whitner, Chris Gamble, Kurt Coleman, Ashton Yabuti.
Yeah, I had a tough time with this too. I had Malcolm Jenkins and Chris Gamble at corner. I thought long and hard about the safety because there were so many good ones. But I wound up going with Dante Whitner and Dustin Fox.
Yeah, that's fair. Dustin was very underrated.
My Cooper defensive backfield, the corners, oh my goodness. You had some really, really good corners, but Springs and Winfield are the obvious ones you have to go with. I know Nate Clements was another great one. Ty Howard, Gary Berry, there were so many, but Springs and Winfield are obvious choices. And then at safety, I went with Mike Doss and Damon Moore.
I had the exact same group, and I also was struggling because Ahmad Plummer was really good too.
Yep. And for those that are older, also you may remember Roger Harper was a really good player for the Buckeyes in the late 80s and early 90s.
Yeah, I think Vinnie Clark as well was really good.
Special teams, obviously Tressel is going to win special teams, but Ohio State has been fortunate to have some really, really good punters for a long time. So I went under Cooper, Scott Turna, and Josh Jackson at kicker.
I actually didn't. I mean, I'd go with Jackson as well. I think I'll go with Bartholomew for Cooper.
Okay. And Tressel, I had Mike Nugent and Andy Groom, although I am going to give honorable mention to B.J. Sander and A.J. Trapasso as well.
I went Andy Groom. He averaged 45 yards a punt, and he could kill the ball. And on top of that, I don't even have to list the kicker. You know who it is.
Nuge. And so who did you have for Urban Meyer? This is probably punter's definitely easy. I'm curious what you went with kicker.
Cameron Johnson, obviously, for the punter. I struggle with the kicker. I stuck with Nuremberger because I don't think the kicker's been that great under Meyer, so I just stuck with Nuremberger.
I went with Nuremberger as well. So good grief! I mean, out of all these position units, we wound up picking the same guys at least half the time, right?
More than that, actually. I think very few positions we were that far off on. It's just like I think the linebackers for Cooper for Cooper were a little different. Other than that, I don't not much.
And a lot of it was just because some guys played multiple positions, so it really depended on where you put a guy that had an impact on how you would put a starting lineup together. So go ahead.
I was going to ask you. So who do you think? Which team wins?
I'm picking Cooper. I really am. I'm looking at this. Jermaine is comparable to Haskins, even if you don't think he's better. He's comparable. You've got Eddie George and Robert Smith, or Michael Wiley. You throw in there as a playmaker. You've got the best group of receivers by far. You've got probably the best overall tight end in there. You've got the best offensive line, I think. You may not have the best defensive line. That probably is Urban Meyer, but you've got a really good one. You've got a good set of linebackers, including Andy Katzenmoyer, who is just a freak of nature. And then you had the best, I think, the two best cover corners in Ohio State history, Springs and Winfield. You could put Denzel Ward in that mix too, but I think Winfield and Springs were the absolute best. So when you put it all together, I think Cooper's lineup from top to bottom is the best.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm struggling because I think Haskins makes up for a lot. So I'm thinking maybe, or man, imagine Haskins with Zeke. Oh my goodness. Gosh, yeah, I can lean Cooper, but at the same time, I also think I would. Oh man, I'm struggling here. Gosh, Springs and Winfield were amazing, but so was Ward and Lattimore. So it's like. Oh,
I think for me that the offensive line is the big difference, because you can make a case for some of the skill guys, obviously Zeke and Dwayne Haskins, but the receivers, nothing.
Receivers are Cooper. That's crazy.
Yeah, the receivers there for Cooper is just insane. I mean, Michael Thomas is really good, but there's a little bit of a drop off after Michael Thomas for Urban. But you have those 3 or 4 receivers for Cooper on top of that offensive line, and a really good quarterback and really good running backs. And I think that's just an insane offense. I think it's a really good defense. I think overall, I would probably take Urban's defense collectively, but because of the impact players, not only in the defensive backfield but up front, I like Cooper's offensive team and defensive team combined.
Yeah, you could definitely make an argument for Cooper. I think I'll go with Meyer because I like Haskins that much more than any other quarterback, and and the defense is better, and I think the offensive line for Meyer is at least comparable to Cooper, except for the tackle position. But Taylor Decker is really good. Yeah, I'm going to lean Urban on this one. I'll disagree a little bit.
It's interesting that I think underscores how much Ohio State underachieved with John Cooper, because obviously Jim Tressel had better overall results, not just because of the Michigan thing, not just because of winning the national title, not just because of the national title, but just even more consistency overall. I mean, obviously those are the two things that you're worried about most, and you should be. But it's just funny because, Jim Tressel obviously had the better career at Ohio State than did John Cooper. But when you do this exercise and you compare overall roster talent-wise, it's insane how much better John Cooper's roster looks on paper.
I'm still in awe of the fact that Orlando Pace and Corey Stringer were starting on the same offensive line for 1 year at Ohio State. That's ridiculous. I mean, if that quarterback got any pressure, it's because he waited 37 seconds to throw the ball.
If you're too young to remember Orlando Pace, it's really too bad for you, because, I mean, Orlando Pace finished, second or third in the Heisman voting as an offensive tackle. I mean, there for a good 8 to 10 years, they were keeping track of pancake statistics because of Orlando Pace, because of how many times he put guys on their butts on the ground. I mean, he was just the most dominant offensive lineman in college football to this day that I've seen. I have not seen one that I think is as good as Orlando Pace was at Ohio State.
At Ohio State, no. Maybe nationally, Jonathan Ogden?
Yeah, maybe.
Another really dominant. Tony Mandridge, but he was roided up, so it doesn't really count.
So
Pace was amazing.
So this has been a fun exercise. I do if you guys want to contribute to this, by the way, feel free to hit up Corey or myself on Twitter. I'm at KYLam8. Corey is at Scarlet Great, GreatCT. Scarlet Great CT. You hit him up on Twitter. Hit me up on Twitter. We'd love to hear more feedback. What you think about this? What do you think of our rosters, our one deep, our honorable mentions? Is there any changes that you would make? By all means, let's go back down memory road and hit us up on Twitter. This would be a fun conversation that we would love to continue on there. So that should be a lot of fun. Corey, so I also understand we've got the Scarlet and Great podcast coming up on Wednesday as usual, and it is my understanding that I will be filling your shoes.
Yeah, I'm working way too much this week. It's a little insane, and I don't know if I'll have time to record and edit. But yeah, I want to say we got a great interview with Jack Miller Sr. coming up on this Wednesday show, so you won't have to do like an hour show like we usually do.
So I will be filling in for Corey. I will be co-hosting with Johnny Bullitt. Do you got any words of wisdom for me how I navigate this? I'm going to be sitting in the 2-chair probably, which is going to be odd for me. But how do I fill your role? I mean, do I sit back and act dumb, make a couple snarky comments here and there? I mean, is that the gist of it?
You know me, friend. It's not an act, so don't insult my intelligence. No, I would just disagree with everything Johnny says. You'll probably be right.
I'll tell him you said that. We'll see. We'll get him rattled up a little bit. So yeah, please stay tuned for that. The Scarlet and Great podcast coming out on the Unscripted Ohio Network, like usual. That is coming up on Wednesday. I will be filling in for Corey, and we'll be doing the show with Johnny. Of course, I'll be back on Friday with the normal Unscripted Ohio podcast. I hope to have at some point, if it's not this week, next week, our newly minted Buckeye Grove co-podcasting host Alex Gleitman. I'm going to get him on here very, very soon. Next week, I'm also hoping to preview the season with the Sporting News Bill Bender, friend of the show, been on several times. Very much looking forward to getting him back on to preview the college football season. So a lot coming up. Corey, you guys have got so you got Jack Miller Sr. coming up. What else do you have coming up in the near future or can you share as far as interviews? Do you have anything else lined up that I was not remembering?
No, but we're working on some big ones. So right now with camp going on, it's a little bit, clogged up a little. So, but we are working on some big ones coming up in the near future.
Okay, so pay attention to that. Corey and Johnny have been, in all seriousness, they have been killing it with the interviews lately. So make sure you stay tuned to the Scarlet and Great podcast. You can listen to both podcasts every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Starting later this fall, we will be going 5 days a week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. You can listen to us on SoundCloud. Please give us a follow there if you subscribe or listen, or please subscribe if you listen. And then you can also hear us on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and Stitcher. And, of course, we publish the Unscripted Ohio podcast specifically on BuckeyeGrove.com every Monday and Friday, soon to be every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. That's going to do it for us. Thanks to Corey for joining the show. And, of course, give us a listen on Wednesday as Johnny and I come back at you with the Scarlet and Gray podcast. Have a great week, everybody.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.